Hello, my name's Melvyn Wood, and today I'm going to be starting a series of flies that are primarily meant for the beginners. It complements the SBSs that I've been putting up on my Facebook channel, and lots of interest has been shown in that. So today's the first fly in the series, and it's the bloodworm. Before we start tying the bloodworm, there's some basic principles that we need to show you, and the first of these is putting the hook in the vise. I always put the hook in the vise to the first or to the barb there and tighten up gently. Now that hook is not parallel. We need the hook parallel. And then when it's parallel, we can just tighten it up. Next, we need to get the thread onto the hook. And to do this, we place the thread about 1 millimetre away from the eye of the hook. And we put a couple of turns on it. And then we come over those thread wraps that we just put on in a couple of turns. When we've done that, we can hold this tag end thread up at that sort of attitude, and we can then come down the hook in touching turns. Having the tag end up in the air and tight like that means that we can run our tying thread down it and it butts up snugly with the previous turn. Having tied the fly, we need some way of finishing it off, and we call this finishing knot a whip finish. We'll start at the eye again, about 1 millimetre away, 2 turns, over again 2 turns, lift your tag end, back down the shank, and we're going to come back again. I'm going to cut this tag end off, and I'm now going to whip finish. And I'm going to use a tool, funnily enough, called a whip finishing tool. And that's it. It's a rotary device. And we simply slip the thread on, twist it to form a triangle, and just 1, 2, 3 turns and unhook it. Simple as that. Onto the thread, make your triangle, 1, 2, 3, unhook it, thread made. There's also another way of accomplishing this. It's with the refill of a biro. It's not quite as good a knot, it's more of a half hitch, but you can put 1, 2, 3 turns onto the biro refill. You can put the biro refill over the eye of the hook, and you can simply push it off with your nail, and that also ties you a knot, but there are half hitches. And having done a half inch, always finish off with glue. It stops it coming undone. Now we know how to place the hook in the vise and how to attach the thread to the hook and how to whip finish. We can now tie the bloodworm. We're using as the thread Semperfli's classic wax thread in red, and it's a 12-0. We're starting about 1 millimetre away from the eye, 2 turns and then 2 turns over. Holding the thread like that, we're coming up in touching turns down the hook shank. and we're coming to a point midway between the point and the barb of the hook, which is about there. And I'm going to cut that thread off. Then I'm coming back up the way in touch and turns, and I've nothing really to guide me here. So I'm being very careful and very slow in doing it. Take your time, we're not in a rush, you're not being paid to do it, and we're coming up to there where we tied in. Now we need to tie some more material in, and that material is this stuff. It's marabou, it's very mobile, and it's lovely for tails. So I'm going to pinch off about 1/4 of an inch, 5mm of the fibres from the centre of the stem, and I'm going to dampen them because they don't particularly behave themselves unless they're dampened. Okay, so it's nice and damp. So around about halfway along, and just there, we're going to tie it in. And to tie it in, I'm twisting my thread anti-clockwise. Now, if I was a left-handed tire, I'd be spinning it the other way. I'd be spinning it clockwise. And what that does, it allows a loop to throw over my thumbnail. Okay? And that loop I can pull down nice and slowly, and then firmly, and then put another couple of wraps on. And that material now is tied onto the top of the hook. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift that material, and I'm going to come down the hook shank again in touch and turns. And I'm coming back to where the point of the hook, halfway between the point of the hook and the barb. I'm going to lift this, and I'm going to cut it off. And I'm cutting it off with only so much of the scissors open. I'm not cutting it off with all the scissors open, just that little bit at the end. And this allows us to get closer to the thread wraps. And we also need to shorten this tail, because this tail is massive. And we want to be probably no more, the tail length needs to be no more than the hook, or the length of the hook. And all I'm doing is I'm coming in with my fingers and thumbs, and I'm nipping out. I'm just cutting it with my thumbnail. And that gives me a nice taper, rather than if I cut it off with the scissors, it would be a square cut, which doesn't look natural. Then I'm coming back up the hook shank towards the eye again, touching turns, nice and slowly, up we come. Taking our time, trying to be as accurate as we can be, and we're coming back to where we cut or snipped that little bit of marabou off, and then we're going to neaten everything up by tying those ends in. Now, the bloodworm has a little bit of a raised area, which is its head, and we're going to put that head on now simply by going backwards and forwards with our tying thread, creating that bump, which is the head. and that will do. We need to whip finish it next. Snip our tying thread off. And that's the fly tied. Apart from it needs a coat of varnish. So I'm just going to put some, and in this case I'm just going to put some super glue, if I can get some out of the packet. And cover the fly in a layer of super glue. I could use fly tier's varnish. I could even use certain types of nail varnish. But super glue really soaks in and it dries extremely quick. And I would put 2 coats of super glue on, and when that's dry I would put a coat of fly tier's varnish on it just to finish it off. And that is your bloodworm. I'm often asked how I would fish the flies that I tie, and this particular one I would always fish on the point of a long leader on a floating line with a couple of buzzers up the droppers, and throw it. If I was fishing from the bank, I would be throwing it across the wind and allowing the wind to blow it round, not moving the flies at all. Just throwing it out across the wind, just letting the wave and the wind do its work on the floating line, dragging those those flies through the water. Why on the point? Well, bloodworm are the larvae of buzzers, and they're always on the bottom, and they always start off red as they come out of the silt, and then as they're climbing up the water column they do change colour. So red bloodworm on the point, couple of buzzers up the cast, sling them out across the wind and allow them to roll back. In a boat, slightly different. Again on the point, again with 2 buzzers or a buzzer and an emerger on the top dropper. Throw them out and just keep up to them. Have a drogue out if it's a windy day, and just keep up to those flies. You don't want to be retrieving really. You just want them to be sinking through the water. And tight lines.